Welcome back to the Pirate Republic. This is an audiobook presentation of Pirates of the Wild West, the first novel in the Storm of Time series, released one chapter at a time. Get ready for episode 9. This one's going to be a fun one because we have the return of Black Sam Bellamy and Black Bart Roberts. They went missing earlier in the book, and now we catch up with them. But before we go into this next chapter, chapter 9, I want to bring up the fact that Black Sam Bellamy's birthday is today, February 23rd. And guess what? This is going to shock you. Today is my birthday as well. That's right. Black Sam Bellamy and me have the same birthday. We are under the same sign. I think that is very, I don't know. I feel like I'm connected to the guy, right? I feel like, well, I'm a lot older than him, right? But Black Sam Bellamy was, he was kind of an altruistic pirate. He had a set of rules. He wasn't a pirate that was brutal in any way. He wanted to kind of be like a Robin Hood. That was kind of his thing, the Robin Hood of the Caribbean Sea. So I do feel a kinship to the young man. So he was born on February 23rd in 1689. He was known as the Prince of Pirates. Bellamy just wasn't another cutlass-waving outlaw. He was, in many ways, the pirate who proved that piracy could be more than crime. It could be rebellion. He was born in Devon, England. Bellamy came from humble beginnings. As a sailor, he crossed the Atlantic and found himself in the New World, chasing opportunity like any young man would do. And fortune did not come easily for him. After working as a seaman and treasure hunter in the Caribbean, Bellamy turned to piracy around 1715, a decision that would make him legendary in less than 2 years. But Bellamy was different from many pirates of his time. The crew accounts described him as educated, charismatic, and surprisingly diplomatic and democratic. He believed pirate ships should operate more fairly than the rigid hierarchies of the British Navy or merchant fleets. Under Bellamy, captured sailors were often invited, not forced, to join his crew, sharing equally in plunder. His reputation earned him fierce loyalty and helped him rise up very fast, and rise he did. In 1716, Bellamy captured one of the richest prizes in pirate history, the Widow Galley, a massive former slave ship loaded with treasure from across the Atlantic trade routes. He transformed it into his flagship, heavily armed and fast, the terror of the Caribbean of the shipping lanes. At just 27 years old, Black Sam commanded a fleet and controlled immense wealth. Some historians estimate his treasure haul would equal tens of millions of dollars in today's money. Yet his legend burned bright and brief. In April of 1717, the Widow sailed north along the American coast, probably bound for Cape Cod, and perhaps toward a reunion with a woman that Bellamy reportedly loved in Massachusetts, a detail that gives his story a rare, romantic edge among pirate tales. But fate had other plans. A violent nor'easter struck off the coast near Wellfleet, Massachusetts. Then Whittier was driven onto a sandbar, and the storm basically just thrashed it and destroyed it. Bellamy and most of his crew were all lost at sea, ending one of the shortest yet most successful pirate careers in the Golden Age. Now today, the wreck of the Whittier remains one of the only fully authenticated pirate ships ever discovered. It was recovered in 1984 along with thousands of artifacts that confirmed the legend of Black Sam Bellamy. He lived only 28 years, but in that short life, Bellamy became a symbol of freedom, rebellion, and the idea that even pirates could dream of a more equal world. So today, February 23rd, we remember Black Sam Bellamy, the Prince of Pirates, whose legend proves that sometimes the brightest stars burn the fastest, and also, raise a little glass to yours truly, an old pirate, a pirate in dreams, a pirate in my own little neck of the woods, and the pirate that is now spinning the yarns for you to enjoy. So in this chapter, Black Sam Bellamy, who also had come in contact and sailed alongside Blackbeard and Benjamin Hornigold, but
He had found his new friend, Black Bart Roberts, and the two of them were Shanghaied in the Wild West, 1873. Here is Episode 9.
Chapter 9. Shanghied. Bartholomew Roberts groaned and opened his eyes with great difficulty. They felt crusty and sore as he rubbed them with his hands. His tongue felt too large for his mouth as he tried to swallow and lick his dry lips. His eyes had trouble focusing on the metal ceiling that was inches above his pounding head. He reached out and touched the cold gray metal and immediately noticed his naked fingers. It had been years since he had looked at his knuckles without the adornments of several layers of gold and silver rings. Funny that vanity brings me back from a stupor, he thought to himself, as he realized that it wasn't the ceiling that was within touching distance, but the bottom of a bunk bed that hung over the one he was lying in. Carefully, he swung his heavy-feeling legs to the side and bent down underneath the low-hanging bunk. The entire interior of the room was metal and lined with more than a dozen other bunks, several of which were occupied by sleeping men. His hands went to his chest in search of his prized diamond-laden cross, and he cursed to find it gone. Roberts rose to his feet and quickly grabbed hold of the side of the bunk to keep himself from falling. His head swam as a moment of dizziness enveloped him. Swaying and taking a careful step forward, he turned to scan the room. 2 bunks down, he noticed the long, dark, wavy locks that belonged to Sam Bellamy. He grabbed the sides of each bunk to remain stable as he made his way toward him. Sam, wake up, matey." Sam was slow to stir, but as his eyes opened and focused on Roberts, it was clear he was experiencing the same disorientation and dizziness that hung over Bart. "Where are we? What happened?" Sam asked as he slowly sat up, stooping below the low-hung bunk above him. Robert sat down on the floor next to him and rubbed the sides of his head to ease the ache he felt there. "Was it all a dream? Are we in Nassau? Is this some sort of prison?" asked Sam. "Don't know, but feels as though we are on a ship, one of the metal ones we'd seen. So probably not a dream, I'm afraid." Sam settled a bit and noticed the slow rise and fall of the ship he found himself in. Sure enough, he knew what it felt like to ride the open ocean, and he knew they were indeed at sea. He rose on unsteady feet, as Roberts had done, and looked around at the room. Strange bulbs hung from wires, creating soft light without heat or flame. He stared and wondered what sort of magic could create such light. He knew in the back of his mind it must be a technology that was of the time they had found themselves thrown into. There were several other men in bunks, a few of whom were waking from their slumber because of the sounds of the pirates' voices. They all turned toward the heavy metal door as it opened, and a large man with a thick red beard stepped through. He stooped his enormous frame through the opening and grinned at the groggy group of men. "You all had a good night's rest?" he said with a thick Scandinavian accent. "I am Vern, the quartermaster. You all can call me boss. Sure enough." He turned and looked at each of the 8 men having trouble standing or getting out of their bunks. "This here ship is the Lurline, and the captain thanks you one and all for volunteering to work on this great voyage." Vern gave a devious grin. "Ain't never been on a ship in my life," one of the men said, practically falling out of his bunk trying to stand up. "I sure as shit didn't volunteer to work on one." "Ha! Well, volunteer you did. Why else would you be on my ship?" Sam Bellamy's stomach was turning as he looked around at the other men, then at Bart Roberts, who looked like he was partly recovered from whatever affliction they all were affected with. "I would remember volunteering for ship work, especially as I've been a captain myself for many years," Roberts said. "Captain? Ha! You'll be lucky to make cabin boy on Lurline dressed like that," Vern said, looming over Roberts and eyeing his 17th century pirate clothes. "You goddamn Shanghaied us, you bastard," said an older man with a long mustache that curled at the ends. "What does that mean? Shanghied?" "What's that?" asked Sam. The older man shook his head in disbelief and cursed under his breath. "The bastard drugged us, stole us off onto this damn ship, and we're, God knows where, forcing us to work on this ship." Vern smiled and crossed his arms. It was then Bart noticed the pistol on Vern's hip. It was in a black holster with a black handle grip. He remembered seeing that type of thing on men in the saloon and walking around town. Bart had a feeling of vulnerability wash over him as he realized both he and Sam had been stripped not only of their jewelry, but of all their weapons. He tried to remember what happened that would have put him in this predicament. He and Sam had wandered the streets of the strange city called San Francisco trying to make sense of their circumstances. Sam was completely broken-hearted once he realized he would never be able to return to his love, Mary. Bart had felt a kinship to the young man, mostly through Sam's reputation in the Pirate Republic. He was impressed that Sam had been able to become so successful in his pirating career in such a short time while maintaining and even expanding upon the pirate code of conduct. He saw a fresh version of his younger self in Bellamy. Vern nodded to two hardened men who stood in the doorway. Neither man looked as if they had smiled since childhood. They entered the room and stood beside Vern. "This here's Max and O'Farrell," Vern said, indicating Max as the lanky bald man on his left, and O'Farrell as the barrel-chested shorter man on the right. "They're going to give you your work duties, and I expect their orders to be followed to the letter, lest I have to deal with you." "I demand to talk with the captain," one of the men yelled out. "The captain is a busy man. Too busy to deal with the likes of you all. You'll just be dealing with me. Consider my words as those of the captain's. I'll have no disagreements and no dereliction of duty from the crew," Vern said. "What if we refuse to work for you?" the older man with the curling mustache asked. Vern menacingly approached the man and growled, "If you ain't going to work, then no need for you to be on my ship. Maybe you try swimming back to San Francisco. Max, how far are we from San Francisco now?" Maybe only 100 or so miles. Easy swim, for a dolphin." "Can you swim like a dolphin?" Vern smiled viciously. The old man averted his eyes from the icy smile. "I thought not. Well then, it's been decided. We've all got jobs to do, so let's have at it." With that, Vern turned and exited, leaving Max and O'Farrell to assign the group to their respected jobs on board the Lurline. The temperature was stifling in the boiler room, where Sam and Bart found themselves stationed, along with a dozen or so men. The heat and steam permeated from every pipe and piece of metal that twisted and wove throughout the stern of the ship. The two pirates were in awe as they were led through the enormous ship, never imagining that such a marvel of advanced technology could exist. They had barely said a word to one another, not that it was easy to hear each other over the loud churning and droning of the engines. The two men were toiling, feeding the burners with coal while monitoring the temperature gauges as they were showed how to do by the stocky O'Farrell. Sam wiped his drenched brow with his sleeve and was shocked to see it come away black with soot and coal dust. He looked over at Bart Roberts and saw that he, too, found himself coated with the same black muck. They had shed their coats and scarves prior to starting their tasks. He couldn't imagine there was a worse job on this ship. Sam would need to find a way to escape this fate with his new friend, Bart. He found himself wondering again if he was truly dead and hell was where he had really ended up. The intense heat only added to the viability of his nightmare. He was sinking into an abyss of despair as he continued to shovel the black coal into the mouth of the burner. Thoughts of his lovely bride-to-be began to bring tears rolling down his soot-covered cheeks. He had been so close to sailing back from the Caribbean to marry her. He had had a ship, crew, and many chests full of gold to prove to her family that he wasn't just some bilge rat wanting her hand with no means of support. Now all that was gone. He was back to doing the dirty work of a common simpleton in another time and place, with no hope of going back. The older man they had met earlier with the long mustache was moving a cart full of coal when he passed by a burner that was loaded too heavily with fuel. It coughed up a burst of flame. The man shoveling coal into the burner jumped back, accidentally slamming his shovel into the side of the mustached man's head and sent him falling hard into a bulkhead. Bart was first to react and rushed to the man's aid. Sam also dropped his shovel and went over to assist the fallen man. They each took a side and pulled him to his feet. The man's head and arm were bleeding from deep gashes. "You all right, mate?" Sam asked. The man looked a bit dazed and put his hand on his head. He pulled his hand away to see the blood covering it, and then started to sink to the floor again. Sam and Bart held him up from falling again, but carefully lowered him to the floor so they could look him over. The head wound looked worse than the arm to Bart.
"It's pretty deep, mate," he said. "Might need some sutures. I'm going to wrap it to quell the bleeding." Bart took off his shirt and tore the sleeve from the garment. The outside of the sleeve was filthy from soot, so he pulled the sleeve inside out and tied it around the man's head to stop the bleeding. "Thanks. I'm Chester." The older man held his hand out for Bart's. Bart shook the man's hand firmly. "Bart, this here is Black Sam Bellamy." Sam and Chester nodded hellos. "What the devil is going on here?" bellowed O'Farrell as he came running up. "Why are you men sitting around on the job?" The three men stared at the red-faced Irishman now holding a billy club in his hand, pointing it aggressively at them. "This man is injured. Do you have a surgeon on board?" Sam asked. "I don't give two shits if he's got bones poking out of his skin. Get your arses back to work," O'Farrell screamed at them, raising the club to strike one of them. Sam and Bart looked ready to fight, but the frightened and bruised Chester held up his hands. "I'm all right. I can work," he said. O'Farrell looked hard at each of the men, daring them to challenge his authority. "Then get to work, you shit sacks!" O'Farrell watched as the men went back to their respective duties, then stood leaning against a bulkhead, cleaning his teeth with a thin piece of wood while they worked. The noise of the engine was so loud that Bart and Sam were able to ask Chester questions about the workings of the ship without O'Farrell hearing. Chester had worked on other cargo ships doing maintenance and repairs for many years. He was able to explain the propulsion method these steam-powered ships operated under. Surprisingly, Chester had never learned to sail nor worked on a sailing vessel in all his years. He spent most of his career on riverboats that were steam-powered and that used a paddle wheel to move them about. Chester had traveled to San Francisco to become a miner, but was unable to secure a claim for himself. He had worked off and on repairing ships docked in the harbor for about a year now. He told them it was becoming more and more common that men would be shanghaied into working on cargo ships, as it was difficult to find men to do these filthy and sometimes dangerous jobs. Chester told them he had heard of this ship they were on, the Lurline. She was a cargo ship that made runs between San Francisco and the Hawaiian Islands, delivering farming equipment and textiles, then bringing back pineapples, coconuts, sugar cane, and native hardwoods to be sold at the San Francisco markets. The pirates surprised Chester by never having heard of the Hawaiian Islands before, as well as with their lack of knowledge regarding steamships. He found their ignorance very odd, as they both claimed to be captains of sailing ships based in the Bahamas. Chester explained how the 6 boilers they were continually shoving 42 tons of coal into each day-powered turbines that turned the screw, moving the ship at a rate of 17 knots. It took almost 100 men working in 4 shifts to power the craft. The travel time to cover the entire 2,500 miles to Hawaii was just under a week, depending on the Pacific Ocean's conditions. This time of year, it wasn't uncommon to have to pass through a typhoon or smaller storm while on the journey. It wasn't a worry, though, with this size vessel. It just delayed their arrival. The hard labor was taking a toll on Sam's back, and he stopped his shoveling to stretch it out as a new group of sad-looking men entered the engine room. It looked like the next shift was coming to relieve them. Sam glanced at Bart, who was covered in black soot with one sleeve missing from his shirt. Bart, too, was watching the new group enter, with Max trailing them. O'Farrell capped a flask of drink that he'd been sipping on and pushed himself up from the bulkhead he'd been leaning against. He approached Max, and the two conversed for a moment before O'Farrell walked to the center of the engine room to address the workforce. "All right, ladies, shift's over. Go get yourselves fed and rested." Sam and Bart followed the line of men toward the exit. There were basins of water for the men to wash off the coal dust and grime the best they could. What Sam would give for the ability to dive into the warm, clear waters of the Caribbean right now. Once they were as clean as they could get using the same dirty water as the other men, they followed the group through the various hallways and stairs until finally coming to a crowded mess hall. Sam remained in awe of the size of the ship. Even this kitchen and dining area impressed him with its ability to feed and sit 100 men at a time. There was a counter that was serving plates of chicken, potatoes, vegetables, and bread. Sam and Bart both looked at the metal plates, forks, and knives to eat with and couldn't believe the fare that was served to the general crew. The two pirates stood in line to fill their plates behind Chester. Once their turn arrived in front of the food servers, they were shoved aside by the stocky O'Farrell. "Give way, you lot," he growled. Bart held Sam back from confronting the foul man, and they waited for him to have his plate filled by the cook, and leave to sit with a small group of uniformed men in the far corner of the mess hall. Bart and Sam held their plates out next and watched with mouth-watering impatience as the food was dished out for them. They took their trays and searched the room for a space to sit. Sam's stomach was growling like a hungry wolf from the smell of the hot food wafting to his nose as they made their way to a couple of empty seats. He and Bart sat at a long table across from their new friend Chester and a few other men that had worked their shift in the engine room. Sam savored the first bite he took of the seasoned chicken, then began to quickly devour the rest of his food. He glanced over at Bart to find him doing the same. He was quickly forgetting the fact that they had forced him to work on this ship, as his stomach was now in control of his mood. Strange how basic needs can outweigh your sense of pride and freedom of choice, he thought to himself. I don't think I've had a better meal, Bart said as he used his bread to wipe up the remaining potatoes and juices from his plate. His eyes hooded as he popped the piece into his mouth. The pay is bad, if any, but they will keep you fed. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the strength to shovel all that coal, Chester said. Just imagine what they are feeding the paying passengers, another man said as he shoved his mouth full of potatoes. What do you mean paying passengers? Sam asked. The top level has room for 200 or so folks that are traveling to Hawaii, the man said. 200 people not working on the ship? The man looked quizzically at Sam. He pointed his fork around the room. Lower levels are for us workers. Top level is for passengers. We live and eat down here. They live and eat up there. Mate, are you telling us there is more than one galley on this ship? Bart asked. Some ships have several, Chester answered. The larger ones that cater to first-class passengers have dining rooms to rival anything you'd find in a city like San Francisco. This one is mostly cargo, but they built it to carry passengers as well. Not as fancy as some, but a lot better living conditions than we've found ourselves. This route has become very profitable for the shipping company over the last couple years. Probably charge a couple months' wage for a ticket. Add in the 5,000 tonnage of goods and you're talking quite a haul. The two pirates looked at each other with interest. This ship and its contents could be the single greatest plunder that ever existed. 5,000 tons? We'd seen such ships when we arrived in the harbor, remember, Sam? Sam nodded his head, deep in thought. He was still coming to grips with the idea of this all being real. The idea he and his pirate cohorts had been drowned into the late 1800s. Drowned was the only way for him to describe what happened to them, drowned to reawaken with no hope of going back. He was going to have to live his life without his lost love in a strange new time where ships could sail the ocean without sails or paddles. A world with advanced weapons that could fire many rounds, one after another, without reloading. A time where giant ships crossed the ocean in weeks, not months, carrying enormous amounts of cargo and holds made entirely of metal. England and the Crown would have long ago forgotten their names and the crimes they committed. They were free again, free from the pursuit of the pirate hunters, free to pursue whatever course and desires they fancied. How many cannon she carry? Sam asked. Chester laughed and shook his head. Who are these men? No cannon. You expecting pirates? Chester continued laughing, and a few other men at the table joined in.
I hope you're enjoying this historical fiction book with pirates and time travel all wound together in it. You can find the ebook and physical books at my website, briancantrell.com. You can also find the second book in this series, Pirates of World War II. And if you're a fan of pirates, you can check out thepiraterepublic.com. It's a weekly newsletter that I put out every Friday. All sorts of great pirate history, events, news, and happenings. You can also toss a few doubloons our way by joining our Patreon at Patreon, The Pirate Republic. We'll see you next week. Till then, fair winds and keep a weathered eye.